Doctor who performed the autopsy on Richardson's baby was on the stand for almost 3 hours today. At question was the cause of death and how that doctor determined it.
And can you please state your opinion?
Homicidal violence of undetermined etiology.
The doctor who performed the autopsy on Brooke Skylar Richardson's baby saying in court that baby was murdered. She just doesn't know exactly how.
All of the evidence points to a homicide.
Dr. Susan Brown found 6 skull fractures in the baby's skeletal remains, but could not determine if those fractures happened before or after the baby died. A second expert selected by the prosecution testified those fractures happened after death. Dr. Brown says her autopsy relied on all of the evidence, including police interviews, evidence from the scene, as well as a physical autopsy of skeletal remains. An independent expert hired by the coroner's office incorrectly identified charred bones in an initial examination in July of 2017.
She came back on August 17th, and she says, "Oh, I can no longer say that the remains were burned." Didn't she say that to you?
Yes.
The defense says that is a key part of this trial. According to the defense, the only reason investigators searched the house again and interviewed Richardson the second time is the apparent burn damage to the baby's remains. When asked by defense attorneys if physical evidence alone could prove either a live birth or burn injuries, Dr. Brown said no.
We don't just combust. Isn't that silly? Yes or no?
We do not combust.
And when I say combust, we're talking about putting like a little lighter to a baby's foot or leg and it just all of a sudden bursts into flames. It doesn't make sense, does it? Yes or no?
No.
A large part of today's testimony also discussed whether Richardson had a stillbirth and whether the infant was growth restricted. A fetal medicine expert testified for the prosecution that with all the medical records available, you cannot prove either of those things. Reporting at the Warren County Courthouse, Josh.
In a quiet Ohio courtroom, all eyes fixed on an 18-year-old girl in a pale sweater. Brooke Skylar Richardson sat still, her hands folded, a faint smile on her face, the kind that made people wonder what it meant. Some saw innocence, others saw arrogance. That smile would haunt the room. Carlisle, Ohio wasn't the place for secrets. Brooke was the town's pride, a cheerleader, honor student, the girl who never caused trouble. But the perfect image hid something no one saw coming. A doctor's visit changed everything. What should have been routine ended with words that froze her in place. "You're about 8 months pregnant." She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just walked out into the sunlight as if nothing had happened. Days later, she smiled for prom photos, her secret hidden under a glittering gown. That night, while the town slept, Brooke didn't. She had other plans. She walked into the school gym on May 5th, 2017, dressed in the kind of gown every senior dreams about. Soft fabric, a long sweep of skirt, a bodice that glimmered under the overhead lights. Her friends laughed with her, posed for pictures in the foyer of Carlisle High School, handed her corsages, used their phones for snapshots. To the outside world, she was thriving, the cheerleader with grades, smiles, and future plans. Yet beneath that evening's glamour, the dress hugged not just ambition, but a secret none of them suspected. In the early hours of May 7th, the quiet of the Richardson home was broken by the drip of a bathroom faucet and the subtle click of a lock. Behind the door, she faced what she believed she could handle alone. A fetal heartbeat only weeks earlier, now silenced or never heard. She leaned against the wall, knees bent, scalp plastered with sweat, breathing uneven and shallow. The baby appeared, if at all, so briefly, unnoticed by others, unseen by help. Hours later, the silence was overwhelming. No cry echoed in the home. No nurse, no doctor, no one was summoned. In her own handwriting, she later penned one word: Annabelle. It appeared in a lined journal she kept hidden beneath clothes in her room. A name, a memorial, a question. She wrote nothing else. The word floated there like a last-chance whisper, between chapters of prom photos and calorie counts. She buried it, along with the rest of the truth, deep under her quiet fear. On July 12th, the phone call came. A doctor in the gynecology suite reviewed a chart, noted no record of a baby being registered, and phoned law enforcement. Officers responded July 14th to the backyard of the Richardsons' home in Carlisle, Ohio. The U.S. Postal Service had delivered mail that morning. Travelers pulled off Route 42. Children played on the sidewalk. But in a moment, the yard became a crime scene. Brooke's parents, Kim and Scott, stood nearby while forensic officers scanned the ground. She watched their movements from the doorway, her hands trembling, throat dry. Then she whispered to a detective, "I buried her in the backyard." No one moved for a moment. The words hung in the air like a verdict. The shovel struck something small, compacted with dirt and roots. Bones that told stories in silence. Investigators pulled a child-sized skull wrapped in synthetic fabric and plastic bag. A white-gloved hand brushed off years of soil. The world outside the fence still hummed with normality. Inside the yellow tape, time froze. As evidence bags were sealed and photos taken, one officer raised a radio to his lips, breath low. "Unit 4 to base. We found her." The line crackled. The word "her" echoed like a presence. And just like that, the quiet town's illusion shattered. But what the coroner found next changed everything. The sheriff's building smelled faintly of coffee and floor wax when detectives led 18-year-old Brooke Schuyler Richardson into interview room 2. A single fluorescent bulb hummed above her head. A detective's voice stayed measured. "Schuyler, we know you gave birth. Tell us what happened." She spoke barely above a whisper. "I had it alone in my house and I buried it in my backyard." For a moment, no one moved. Then came the second line, quiet but devastating. "I tried to cremate the baby, just a little." The statement ricocheted through the department. What did she mean by cremate? Within hours, investigators secured the small bundle of bones from the family's yard. They logged it, photographed every inch, and sent it to the coroner's office in Dayton. A forensic anthropologist reported traces that looked like charring, suggesting fire. The news traveled fast. Suddenly, a hidden pregnancy had become a possible homicide. Detectives pulled her phone records, scrolling through texts sent the week after prom. "Bossed it up with 300 cals on DA treadmill." In her diary, they found the words, "freedom and fitting into clothes again." Each entry seemed to feed the idea that appearance mattered more than life. Her mother's text soon after discovery read, "Your life could potentially be over." During a second interrogation, detectives pressed harder. "You said you saw movement," one asked. "Did you hear a cry?" She kept her eyes on the table. "I don't think she was breathing," she murmured. Another detective leaned closer. "Did you squeeze her?" Brooke nodded slightly. "I did. But I didn't mean to hurt her. I loved her." The room fell silent except for the recorder's soft click. Her words sat somewhere between confession and confusion. Outside, investigators collected more fragments of her life. Emails to colleges, gym selfies, appointment reminders. Each piece revealed a teenager under pressure to be perfect. Her friends described her as polite but distant, always counting calories, rarely eating lunch. One recalled, "She hated disappointing anyone. She'd rather lie than fail." 2. Prosecutors. That pattern looked like motive. To her defense, it looked like fear. By late July, forensic analysts re-examined the remains. The first claim of burned bone didn't hold up. Under a microscope, what looked like fire damage was ordinary soil discoloration. The expert who made the initial finding retracted it. The lead medical examiner testified later, "Based on the autopsy alone, I cannot determine if it was a live birth." Without proof that the baby ever took a breath, the foundation of a murder case began to crumble. News spread across Ohio. Local papers branded her the cheerleader killer. Talk shows debated privilege and punishment. Protesters stood outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Justice for Annabelle." Others argued the state had gone too far, that this was a tragedy, not a crime. The community split down the middle, half seeking vengeance, half pleading for compassion. For detectives, the case became less about evidence and more about faith in what people believed. They had a body, a confession, and a timeline. yet no scientific proof of life. Every report seemed to cancel the last. The question no longer was what happened that night, but whether anything punishable had happened at all. And just like that, truth turned into a matter of belief. But if the baby never took a breath, what crime was there to prove? It was a warm morning in late July 2017 when flashing red and blue lights cut through the calm streets of Carlisle, Ohio. The Richardson home, usually quiet behind trimmed hedges and a white fence, filled with the echo of police radios and camera shutters. Reporters lined the sidewalk as detectives walked up the driveway. Kim and Scott Richardson stood frozen on their porch, the sound of a mother's breath catching between disbelief and dread. Inside the patrol car sat their daughter, hair tied back, wrists cuffed, face blank. For the first time, the town's golden girl wasn't a cheerleader or an honor student. She was a suspect. When the arrest report hit the county records that afternoon, it read like something out of a nightmare. Aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse. The charges rolled across every news channel in the state. People who once waved to the Richardsons at church now whispered in disbelief. Prosecutor David Fornshell held a press conference saying, "This was a case where a viable baby was born, and the evidence indicates the child was not stillborn." The cameras zoomed in on him as he added, "Our community deserves answers." The soundbite repeated on every evening broadcast. Across social media, headlines labeled her the cheerleader killer. Inside the courthouse, the air carried tension. Strangers filled every seat, neighbors, reporters, students, parents. Half the crowd wanted justice, the other half wanted mercy. Behind the defense table, Brooke sat silent, her, attorney Charles Ritgers beside her. In the front row, her mother clutched a tissue, eyes fixed on the floor. Fornshell's tone was sharp, precise, built on duty. Ritgers spoke softly, choosing his words with care. When the prosecutor described a deliberate act to protect image over life, the defense countered. A frightened young girl alone in a moment of panic should not be equated with malice. Each sentence drew gasps, whispers, and divided hearts in the gallery. As the hearings progressed, the contrast between the two sides became a portrait of conflict itself. Fornshell stood upright, methodical, emphasizing accountability and the right of a child to live. Ritgers, seasoned yet fatherly in tone, emphasized isolation, shame, and an untreated eating disorder that left her mentally and physically depleted. To the jury pool and to the nation watching online, it became more than a trial. It was a mirror held to society's judgments of young women, control, and the expectations that crush them. When Brooke was moved from Holding to county jail, a news crew captured the footage. She looked small in the orange jumpsuit, head bowed. Later, in a recorded conversation with investigators, her voice trembled as she said, "I didn't mean to hurt her. She wasn't breathing." One detective, trying to remain neutral, replied quietly, "Skylar, it's important we understand your intent." She whispered back, "There wasn't any. I just panicked. I didn't know what to do." The words played repeatedly on nightly news segments, dissected by pundits and viewers alike. Some said it was guilt, others said manipulation. Through the bars of a holding cell, she began to write letters, short notes to her parents apologizing, promising she'd never meant harm. She wrote, "I know I made a horrible mistake. I will never forgive myself." Every motion in court added to the strain. Her mother's voice cracked when she told reporters, "She's still our daughter. We love her." The judge ordered a gag on further statements, but the damage was done. The story was everywhere. Morning radio, evening television, national outlets calling it a case of innocence versus image. As days turned into weeks, the small Ohio town became the center of national debate. People traveled from nearby cities to stand outside the courthouse. Some held signs reading "Justice for Annabelle." Others prayed aloud for forgiveness. What started as a local tragedy now belonged to everyone's opinion. The weight of that scrutiny pressed harder on the teenager behind bars, who now faced the full reach of the law. When her attorney visited her one evening in August, the jail's security cameras recorded her pacing slowly, before sitting down at the metal table. Ritkers adjusted his glasses and said gently, "We'll keep fighting, Schuyler. You must stay calm." She nodded and murmured, "I just want my mom." Moments later, the officer signaled time's up. The cell door clanged shut, the echo rolling down the corridor. The once perfect image of the smiling girl from prom night was gone, replaced by the reflection of a prisoner waiting for trial. For the first time, silence wasn't protection, it was punishment, but the real test was still ahead, the courtroom. The trial of Brooke Schuyler Richardson began on September 3, 2019, in the Warren County Common Pleas Court. The courthouse overflowed with people before sunrise. Neighbors, reporters, and strangers drawn by the question that had divided the nation for 2 years. Could an 18-year-old girl really have killed her own newborn to protect an image of perfection? Prosecutor David Fornshell stood tall at the podium, his words deliberate and coldly precise. "She wanted to keep her life just as it was," he said. "No one could know. Not her parents, not her friends, not the world. So she made sure there was no baby to tell the truth." His statement set the tone, methodical, confident, built on the idea that control had driven every decision she made. On the other side, defense attorney Charles Ritkers sat quietly, fingers clasped, waiting for his turn to speak for the girl whose life now depended on words. When the defense rose, Ritkers didn't speak loudly. He spoke gently, measured, as though addressing a classroom rather than a jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is not a story about malice. It's about fear. A young girl who found herself trapped by shame and silence." He paused, letting the words linger. "Brooke didn't plan a crime. She faced a moment she didn't understand and made a terrible mistake. But that mistake isn't murder." The courtroom was still. Behind him, Brooke sat motionless, eyes red, clutching a tissue. Each side had drawn its battle lines, one painting her as cold and calculating, the other as fragile and broken. Witness after witness took the stand. The state called forensic anthropologist Dr. Elizabeth Murray, who testified about her initial conclusion that the bones showed evidence of burning. But under cross-examination, she admitted that the marks could have been soil stains, not fire. The defense then called medical examiner Dr. Susan Brown, who told the jury, "Based on autopsy findings alone, I cannot determine whether the baby was born alive." That line changed the energy in the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. One juror leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in thought. Without proof of life, the prosecution's narrative began to wobble. The prosecution showed video from Brooke's interrogation. The lights dimmed. On screen, her soft voice filled the courtroom. "I didn't mean to hurt her. She wasn't breathing." In another clip, she said, "I tried to cremate her just a little." The jurors watched closely as her voice broke, her hands shook, her tone flickered between confession and confusion. A detective's voice was heard asking, "Schuyler, did you hear her cry?" Her response, fragile and uncertain, "I thought I did, but maybe I didn't." The sound of her sobs echoed off the walls. Some jurors looked away. Others stared at the screen, searching for intention in every word. Outside, emotions boiled over. Protesters and supporters crowded the courthouse lawn. One side held candles for a baby they called Annabelle, whispering prayers through tears. Others held signs saying, "Let her heal." Cable news vans lined the street. Talk shows debated the case, calling it a test of privilege and morality, how wealth, image, and race shape public sympathy. The story became more than a trial. It became a reflection of America's judgment itself. Inside, closing arguments began. Fornshell looked at the jury and said, "This wasn't an accident. This was about control, image over innocence." Ritkers countered, "You can't call it murder without proof a life existed to take." He turned slightly toward his client. "She has lived with this every day. There is no greater punishment than her own remorse." When the final words were spoken, both sides fell silent. The jury retired to deliberate. Brooke sat hunched at the defense table, her parents behind her mother whispering, "Whatever happens, we love you." Hours passed. Then the call came. Verdict reached. The courtroom filled again. The clerk stood and read aloud. Not guilty on aggravated murder. Not guilty on involuntary manslaughter. Not guilty on child endangerment. Guilty only of abuse of a corpse. Brooke's head dropped. Then, suddenly, she smiled faintly, before breaking into tears. The mix of relief and disbelief rippled through the crowd. Gasps filled the air. A woman in the back muttered, "She's walking free?" while another whispered, "God help her." Judge Donald Odothesith looked directly at Brooke as the courtroom fell silent. His words were firm but compassionate. "In all my years on this bench," he said, "I've never seen someone more destroyed by their own actions than you. I think your choices were horrifying, but I also believe you have suffered enough." The sentence followed. 3 years of probation, no prison time. Brooke nodded, tears streaking her face. Her parents wept quietly beside her. Outside, the crowd roared. Some cheered. Others shouted that justice had failed. Reporters fought for statements as the family's car pulled away under police escort. In that moment, 2 Americas stood face to face, one that saw mercy and one that saw injustice. For the young woman inside that car, freedom didn't feel like victory. It felt like a second chance she might never truly earn. Justice isn't always about punishment. It's about what remains of a person after truth has stripped them bare. Brooke Schuyler Richardson left the courthouse that day a free woman, but she would never again be the same daughter, student, or neighbor the world thought she was. But outside the courthouse, America wasn't ready to forgive. The verdict may have ended the trial, but it didn't end the storm. The day after Brooke Schuyler Richardson walked free, Warren County woke up to a divided reality. Outside the courthouse, protesters still stood with signs, some reading "Justice for Annabelle," others saying "Let her heal." Cable networks replayed the footage of her faint smile and tears again and again, each network interpreting them differently. One commentator called it a disgrace to justice, another called it a story of mercy. The court had spoken, but America wasn't ready to listen. People argued over dinner tables, in classrooms, and across social media about whether the young woman in that pale sweater was a killer or a casualty of silence. In the months that followed, Brooke withdrew from the world. She stopped using social media. Her family moved away from the Carlisle neighborhood where the backyard had become a haunting landmark. Reporters would occasionally drive by the old house, noting that the small patch of earth behind the fence remained untouched. No new grass, no flowers, just a quiet square of soil where a secret once slept. Neighbors still lowered their voices when her name came up. To some, she was the girl who got away with murder. To others, a reminder of how pressure and perfection can destroy a person from the inside out. In 2020, during one of her rare interviews, Brooke's attorney said, "She's not the same person. She wants to rebuild quietly." Her days became routine. Therapy sessions, family dinners, and volunteer work that kept her out of public view. Then, in August 2022, a judge in Warren County approved the motion to seal her record. The conviction for abuse of a corpse was wiped clean from public files. She was, on paper, a free woman again. But paper can't erase memory. The whispers never stopped. When news broke of the sealed record, the backlash was instant. "How do you erase a baby's grave?" one headline read. Others wrote that she deserved a chance to live her life without being haunted forever. The split in public opinion remained as deep as it had been the day she walked out of court. Experts continued to debate what her case revealed about society. Psychologists pointed to the years of body dysmorphia and the weight of family expectations. Dr. Kathleen Manley, who had examined her mental state during the trial, once said, "Brooke lived in a world where failure wasn't an option. That's a dangerous world for any teenager." Medical professionals discussed the phenomenon of concealed pregnancies, how denial and fear can become so powerful that a person hides reality even from themselves. Ethicists questioned whether shame and silence had done more harm than crime itself. To them, the case wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about the cost of secrecy in a culture that demands perfection from young women and punishes them for imperfection. By 2023, Brooke rarely appeared in public. She was seen occasionally at a local grocery store, wearing a hat pulled low, head down, her face thinner but calmer. Former classmates said they wouldn't recognize her if they passed her on the street. One old friend told a reporter, "She used to smile at everything. Now she just keeps walking." That quiet evolution mirrored how the town itself moved on, slowly, cautiously, never completely. Carlisle returned to Friday night football games and block parties, but the ghost of that case still lingered, a reminder that even small towns carry heavy secrets. The case became a teaching point in universities across the country. Law professors used it to discuss reasonable doubt and the ethics of confessions. Psychologists studied it to understand postpartum shock and the hidden crisis of mental health among teens. Women's advocacy groups used it to push for better access to confidential medical care. Every debate circled back to the same haunting question: was justice served, or did fear win? As years passed, the name Brooke Schuyler Richardson faded from headlines, but never from memory. The soil in her old backyard remained undisturbed, the kind of place neighbors crossed the street to avoid looking at. It was no longer a crime scene, just a scar, one that time couldn't cover. The story's ending wasn't found in the courtroom or the record books. It lived in the silence that followed, in the faces of people still arguing about right and wrong, mercy and consequence. Maybe the real crime wasn't what she did in one night, but what everyone failed to see all along: a girl drowning in silence. Her smile fooled a courtroom. Her silence fooled a town. But history will decide which one was the greater lie. Some stories don't end with justice or closure, just questions that never fade. A baby buried in silence. A girl who smiled through shame. A town still asking what mercy really means. Maybe that's the hardest truth of all. That sometimes justice whispers when we expect it to roar. If this story moved you, share her name, because memory is its own kind of justice.